Hi Jones, how are you? Good, nice to see you again. Yeah, of course we can, Jones. That's what I was going to do some more work on fractions. Do you remember how we did it yesterday? Do you remember how we used that loaf of bread and we thought about how we could divide it up so that the mother could share 3 loaves with herself, her husband and her 2 sons? Well, let's have another look at that video and see how it goes. Well, to start with, as you can see, we take 1 loaf, we divide it in half, so that's half for 2 people, and then we divide another loaf in half, and that gives all 4 of them half a loaf each. So that's 1 to start with. Then the next thing she did was she took the other loaf, and instead of this time dividing it just into half, she halved it once and then halved each of those halves again. So she ended up with 4 quarters, and each of the people got an extra quarter of a loaf. So in the end, what did they have? They all ended up with a half of a loaf each and a quarter of a loaf each. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at how that actually transpires into a bit more like the maths we do in school, and see if we can actually think about how we'd write this. So to start with, we can see that she took 1 loaf for each of the people and she turned it into a half a loaf plus a quarter. And you can see that she did this by halving 2 of the loaves and quartering the 3rd loaf. And by doing this, she was able to give each of them 1/2 a loaf and 1/4 of a loaf. So they ended up with each person got a half plus a quarter. Now, the fractions that we're talking about here are what we call unitary fractions. You don't need to worry about remembering that today. It's just a very big way of saying fractions where we only talk about 1/2, 1/4, 1/3. So they're called unitary because unit means 1. Well, let's have a look at these again, because if you remember at the end of the last video, I said, what do they look like? So let's have a look. What do they look like? Well, we've got 1/2 and 1/4, but when we put them together, does anyone recognise what they look like? Well, let's again have a look at what she did. So as you can see here, she took 3 loaves, she split 2 of the loaves into halves and gave each one of the 4 people a half a loaf, and then she split the 3rd loaf into quarters and gave each person a quarter. But as you can see, we can put these back together another way. Instead of putting them back together as 2 lots of half a loaf and 1 lot of quarters, we can mix them about a bit. We can have 1 loaf made up of 2 halves, and we can have 2 loaves made up of a half and 2 quarters. And if we look at that, we can see that actually the 2 quarters is equivalent to a half. And when we do that, we can then put these together in a different way again. So we can say, look here, we've got the half a loaf plus a quarter of the loaf, but the half is equal to 2 quarters. So we've got 2 quarters plus 1/4. And if we add all that together, we've got 3 quarters. Ah, so that's interesting. 3 quarters. Well, 3/4 is a multiple fraction, not unitary, because we're saying it's more than 1 of the fraction. So here we're having 3 of those quarters. But it's interesting, if we go back, how many loaves did she have? Yeah, she had 3 loaves. And what did she have to share those 3 loaves amongst? Yeah, she had to share it amongst 4 people. So it was 3 loaves divided amongst 4 people. 3 divided by 4. And what did we end up with? We ended up that each of them had 3/4 of a loaf each. So there you go, we can look at that fraction, and we can see that one way of looking at the fraction is saying that it's 3 divided by 4. 3 over 4. 3 divided by 4. It's also the answer of what each of those people gets. They get 3/4. And as you can see here, we don't actually have to cut the loaf into quarters. We can just imagine that the loaf would have 3 of the quarters in it, and 1/4 is not there. Well, actually, 1/4 have been made up to make another 3/4 somewhere else. So we can see that in these examples that we've moved away from the original idea of fractions, which were unitary and saying that somebody had a half plus a quarter, and now we've realised that we can express that as one easier fraction. We can, instead of saying half plus a quarter, we can simply say, well, half plus a quarter is the same as 3/4. Okay, so now let's have a look at a fraction in a bit more detail. Here's a couple of fractions here, a half and 3/4, and you can see that they're made up of 4 individual digits. So let's have a look first at the half. So with the half, the number on the top is 1 and the number on the bottom is 2. Now the number on the top we call the numerator, and this simply tells us how many of that fraction we've got. The word numerator is very like number, so it is telling us the number of these fractions we have. The number on the bottom is the denominator, and the word nominate sounds very much like name, and that's because that's what it is. It's naming the fraction. It's telling us which particular fraction we are using. So in this case, the 2 tells us the fraction we're interested in is half. So we have 1 for the numerator, we have 1, and we have 2 for the denominator, which is half, so we have 1/2. Now if we look at the other fraction, we have 3 for the numerator, so we're having 3 of this particular fraction, and the denominator is 4, which tells us the fraction is quarter or quarters. So we have 3/4. Okay, so there you go, there you have the 2 parts of each fraction. Now we can't think of these as separate numbers, we have to think of them as they are. The top one tells us how many of the fraction we have, and the bottom one tells us the name of the fraction, which in this case, if we're looking at a half, it means we've divided something into 2 equal parts. If it's quarters, we've divided it into 4 equal parts. And remember, we don't actually have to cut up something or divide it into each of these parts. It's only in our mind that we are dividing them up. We don't actually, if we've got a cake and I want to give you a quarter of it, I don't have to cut it into 4 pieces to start with. I can imagine those 4 pieces and just cut the piece that I actually need, the 1/4. Or if I want to cut half, I just simply cut the cake in half. Now the next thing I want to look at with the fractions is this notion of the denominator. And as I said to you, the denominator is simply the name of the fraction. It's the type of fraction we're using. So as you can see here, I've got 3 green apples and 4 red apples. But when I add them together, I can't say there are 7 green apples or 7 red apples. And I can't come up with some strange colour by mixing red and green together. I have to change them into something that works for both of those apples. So I can't call them red, I can't call them green, I just simply call them apples. Now I can add them together and I can say I have 7 apples. Likewise, if I've got 3 green apples and 3 bananas, I can't say I've got 6 apples or 6 bananas. I have to change them into something that works for both, a common word that names both of them. And in this case, the common word is fruit. So I can add them together now, and I have 6 pieces of fruit. Just in the same way as we can't add together bananas and apples without converting them into something that's common, I can't add 2 different denominators fractions together. So here you can see I've got 1/6 add 1/2. Well, they have different denominators. The denominator on the first one is a 1/6, and the denominator on the second one, 2, is half. So I can't just simply add them together. What I need to do first is convert them into something that is common to both of them. Now in this case, I can convert the half into sixths. So I can keep my first number 1/6, and I can convert my half into 3/6. Now notice here the difference with the fruit was I just changed it to a common name. But in fractions, if I change it to a common denominator, then I will also have to make a change to the numerator so that it maintains the same value. 1/6 is not the same as 1/2. 1/2 is the same as 3/6. If you're not quite sure about that, go away and have a little draw of a cake and think about cutting in half, and then cut the cake into sixths. How many of those sixths have you got inside the half? And you'll find it's 3. So now I have 1/6 add 3/6, giving me a total of 4/6. Now on some occasions we can't just convert one fraction into the same denominator as the other. We need to change both of them into a denominator that works for both. So here I have 1/3 add a quarter. I can't change either of them to be the same as each other, so I need to change both of them into twelfths, and 1/3 I change into 4/12, and 1/4 I change into 3/12. Now I can add the two together and I've got 7/12. So here we have it then. We have two numbers here, a half and a quarter. They are different denominators, so I can't add them together, but if I change the half into 2/4 like we did earlier, now I've got that. I have a common denominator of 4 or quarters, and I can now add them together. So 2/4 add 1/4 is 3/4. Okay, don't worry about following this too much on this occasion. We're just talking about them for the moment. We will in a future video do a lot more on adding fractions together where they don't have the same denominator. So don't worry too much. Just remember that we can't just add denominators together. They are the names of the fractions. They are not numbers, they are names, as the word denominator means, name of the fraction. Okay, have a little bit more thought about fractions. Have a play around with them. Get some pieces of bread and cut them up and try and work out what fractions you've cut them up into. Get a packet of Smarties. Count how many blue ones you've got. Can you work out what fraction of the whole packet are blue? What fraction are orange, and so on. See if you can have a go at that, because that's what we'll be doing in another video. Until then, see you later. Bye bye.